Thrill Seekers. That was a little piece of a song called Yesterday Will Never Tell. It's from the third Dementia 13 album, Disturb the Air, and I hope you enjoyed it because it took forever. My hair is going weird. It took forever to record it. I'll leave out the details on that, but it was really hard to record that one. So, I wanted to talk to you about a phrase that has bugged people for a long time. And this is kind of old news, I suppose, because I found an essay written about this from 2013, so some people may already know this anyway. But I'm going to assume a lot of people don't already know this. There's a line in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Suzuki Roshi, by Shunryu Suzuki, most famous Zen book of all time, probably. I don't know if it's the most famous Zen book, but it's the first Zen book I ever read, so it's the most famous Zen book of all time to me. And it goes like this. It's on page 39, apparently, I don't know, of some edition. When we reflect on what we are doing in our everyday life, we are always ashamed of ourselves. One of my students wrote to me saying, "You sent me a calendar and I am trying to follow the good mottos which appear on each page, but the year has hardly begun and I have already failed." Dogen Zenji said, "Shoshaku Jushaku." Shaku generally means mistake or wrong. Shoshaku Jushaku means to succeed wrong with wrong, or one continuous mistake. According to Dogen, one continuous mistake can also be Zen. A Zen master's life could be said to be so many years of Shoshaku Jushaku. That means so many years of one single-minded effort. Okay? That's the phrase. And for a long time, apparently there were people who were very vexed about this because they couldn't find the place where Dogen said one continuous mistake. And Kokyo Henkel from the, who used to be called Luminous Owl, I think was what he was calling himself. Anyway, he figured out where it came from and he put an essay online about it, and that's what I'm referring to partly, and I'm also referring to partly my own research, which found a different thing from what Kokyo Henkel found. What Kokyo found was a line in Dogen's extensive record, aka Eihei Koroku, and it says, "There is a principle of the way that we must make one mistake after another." And there are a couple of places that I found in Shobo Genzo where he says something that sounds a bit like one continuous mistake. This is from Gyobutsu Yuigi, which is Dignified Behavior of Acting Buddha, and he says, "The present grasping does not depend upon action, which is letting go. Rather, it is a dream, an illusion, a flower in space. Who can put this mistake in its place as a dream, an illusion, a flower in space? A forward step is a mistake, a backward step is a mistake. One step is a mistake, and two steps are a mistake. Therefore, action is mistakes at every moment." Okay, that's one phrase. Now, I just kind of threw that out there to tell you about it because I want to tell you about the one I thought was kind of more interesting. That one shows up in Shobo Genzo Book 2 if you're looking at the Nishijima Cross version, the purple cover one. The other one also appears in Book 2 in an essay called Hakujushi, Cedar Trees. Now this essay references a really famous Zen koan which goes like this. The great master is once asked by a monk, I guess the great master is Joshu, is once asked by a monk, what is the ancestral master's intention in coming from the West? And the ancestral master is Bodhidharma, who supposedly came from the West in terms of China, the West being India. It's to the west of China. And what was Bodhidharma's intention in coming? So Bodhidharma's intention in coming is a funny thing because Bodhidharma is said to be the guy who started the whole ball rolling as far as Zen was concerned. He was the guy who invented Zen. He was the Robert Johnson of Zen. If you're into blues, I've just been looking at stuff about Robert Johnson, the blues guitarist who's said to have invented everything about the blues. What the hell is going on here? I'm going to wait for that airplane to pass. Okay, and Bodhidharma's intention in coming from the West is an interesting question because Bodhidharma came to China, and in a lot of ways he was a total failure in his lifetime. He had 4 students, and that's all that he could attract. Nobody knew about him, nobody cared about him except those 4 people. But what happened later is one of those 4 people, Hakuin? No. What the hell is his name? If I remember the guy's name, I'll put it on the screen. I'm so bad with these things. Anyway, one of those guys went out and made a big deal and made Zen happen. So you kind of look at Bodhidharma, what was his intention? Well, he just taught these 4 people. Well, he made a big deal. Okay, so that's kind of the background, more or less. So the master, Joshu, answers, the cedar trees in the garden. This is also the basis of one of my favorite Zen jokes is, how many Zen masters does it take to screw in a light bulb? Answer, the cedar tree in the garden. Okay, so it sounds like a nonsensical answer. The monk says, Master, do not teach a person with objective things. The master says, I do not teach people with objective things. The monk says, what is the ancestral patriarch's intention of coming from the West? It changes. I don't know if it says in the original master or patriarch. It doesn't matter. And then the master says, the cedar trees in the garden. Just the same thing again. So here is Dogen's commentary, and I'm going to read you the commentary, and it's slightly long, and I apologize for that. But here it goes, because I think it's got some stuff in here that's worth talking about a little bit. This koan, although it stemmed from Joshu, ultimately is that which all Buddhas with their whole bodies have established. Just who is the boss? And this refers to an old story. Master Zhuigan used to call himself boss and answer himself yes. So he'd say, hey boss, and then he'd say yes. So that's what that refers to. Maybe we'll go into that koan another day. The truth we should recognize in the present story is the principle that cedar trees in the garden are beyond objective things, and the principle that cedar trees are beyond the self. Because the monk says, Master, do not teach people with objective things, and because Joshu says, I do not teach people with objective things, what master could be restricted by being master? How can you be just restricted by your own name? Because he is not restricted, he may be I, and the footnote here says ware is what he's saying with I, and we've talked about this thing between ware and jiko, and maybe you can refer to my old videos for that. And Nishijima Roshi says, so ware means the master himself. In order to describe a real thing, Master Dogen often describes the thing as not being restricted by the concept thing, by the concept of itself. What I could be restricted by being I. Even if restricted, I may be a person. And his footnote says, Nishijima Roshi's footnote says, the character Hito, or human being, appears in both the monk's words, a person, and Master Joshu's words, people. The point is that whether restricted or not, we cannot escape from the fact that we are human beings. And Dogen goes on. What objective thing could not be restricted by the ancestral master's intention in coming from the West? Because objective things must inevitably be his intention in coming from the West. At the same time, the intention in coming from the West is beyond dependence upon objective things. The ancestral master's intention in coming from the West is not necessarily, quote, the right Dharma eye treasury in the fine mind of nirvana. That's the full name of Shobo Genzo. That's what Shobo Genzo translates to. It is beyond the concrete mind, beyond the concrete state of Buddha, and beyond concrete things. And Nishijima Roshi's note says, in other words, the questioner is a person existing independently. The present expression, what is the ancestral master's intention in coming from the West, is not only the asking of a question, and is not only two people having got the same idea. Just at the moment of such a question, it is impossible for the questioner to meet with anybody. And the footnote says, in other words, the questioner is a person acting independently. Ooh, existing independently. Wow, I read the wrong footnote for that one before, but anyway, good footnote, so good to read it twice. So let's just keep going. And by himself, he can attain how much. And the footnote here says, how much or how many may be interpreted as an expression of the immeasurable or the ineffable. At the same time, the words suggest that the independent self has nothing to attain. To express it further, he is free of wrongness, and therefore he is one mistake after another mistake. That's the line in question that I've spent this whole time trying to get to. Nishijima Roshi's footnote says, in other words, someone who is doing his or her best is not wrong, but at the same time, in actual life, he or she has to make many mistakes. For example, Master Dogen affirmed the efforts made by the monk in the story, but at the same time, the monk did not understand the intention of Master Joshu's first answer. And we continue with Dogen's commentary. Because he is a mistake after mistake, he sees a mistake as a mistake. Could this be other than on hearing, silence, touching sound? And the footnote here says, when we are silent, we can recognize what sound and non-sound is. Similarly, when we are humble enough to recognize that life is full of mistakes, we can recognize what mistakes and non-mistakes are. And here's my favorite line, because this is so weird coming from Dogen, and I even underlined it in the page on the page in the book. Because the all-pervading soul is free of attachment and detachment, it is cedar trees in the garden. So, all-pervading souls, this is in italics, which is usually Nishijima Roshi and Mike Cross's way of indicating it's a quote from something older in Chinese, but there's no footnote about it. So, interesting that he would use the term all-pervading soul, because that sounds very sort of like Hindu or Advaita Vedanta rather than Zen. And let's just leave it there, because I want to make some comments about it before we run completely out of time, and I don't want to make this too long. So, mistake after mistake. I once had this conversation with Nishijima Roshi about mistakes, and he, at that time, in the context of that conversation, said something like, I did not make a mistake, or I never make mistakes. I don't think he said I never make mistakes, but I think he said I did not make a mistake, when I think we were referring to something that we were talking about which was clearly a mistake. So, I think what he meant was that our effort is just our effort. What we do is just what we do. And sometimes in retrospect you realize, oh, that was a mistake, and you gotta do something about it to correct it. But the thing is, being as we are human beings with such a limited perspective on everything, we can't help but make mistakes. So life being one continuous mistake, even though that's slightly a mistranslation, I think it's such a freeing concept, because I think that's what my life is, just one continuous mistake. And if you feel your life is one continuous mistake, I think what Dogen is trying to tell us here is don't feel too bad about that, because that's just what life is. Life is one mistake after another mistake, because you can't help but make mistakes. Now, of course, there's a difference between making a mistake and deliberately doing wrong. And I've covered the idea of deliberately doing wrong and Dogen's admonition that we should not do wrong in other places, particularly in my book, Don't Be a Jerk, which is a translation of Dogen's phrase, which usually is translated as don't enact wrong, and I changed it to don't be a jerk. But that's a whole other thing. So there's a big difference between, doing something, deliberately that is not right, and making a mistake. But making mistakes, one continuous mistake, that's what life is. Don't beat yourself up about it, but always try to correct the mistakes you make, I think is the sort of bottom line. And I just like this whole phrase, or this whole section here that I just read you, especially that all-pervading soul business. Interesting that Dogen, being a proponent of Buddhism, which says there is no such thing as a soul, would use a phrase such as all-pervading soul, which goes to show you that everything is not quite as fixed as you might think it is in these philosophical thingies, whatever they are. Anyway, that's it. That's what I wanted to say about one continuous mistake. If you want to help me make more mistakes, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is where I get most of my funding from. That is how I make my living, and I appreciate your support, but as always, you don't gotta support me if you don't want to support me. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Make a mistake. Bye. Hey Ziggy, do doggies ever make mistakes? I don't know. He's in a shirt because he was scared by the fireworks going off last night for Memorial Day. They say the shirt helps dogs get over that fear. I don't know if it's true. Oh, that's what he says about it. Alright Ziggy, we'll talk to you later. Bye.